Okay, so here we have an interesting episode for you today. Shouldn't completely block myself with the microphone because someone who's a fan of my work is writing a doctorate degree and they want to gather expert opinions on Russophobia. So here we go. Here's a lot of questions about Russophobia that I'll try to answer as best as I can. So, when speaking of Russophobia, is it about discrediting Russia's global position, or is it about excluding Russia from the club of major geopolitical players? After all, Russia has consistently mentioned the necessity of its international position for global security. No, Russophobia is a tendency that's based on tribalism. It is based on human nature to be either hateful or at the very least skeptical of those in the out group. To value the in-group and despise the out-group, or as we call it in modern parlance, maybe just pure, good old-fashioned, honest racism. There's a certain school of thought that the ultimate cause where the first spark of Russophobia occurred was when the Eastern Orthodox and Catholic churches split. Of course, from the Russian perspective, the Catholic Church betrayed the true faith. But however you want to phrase that, from that moment on, Russia became the epicenter of, from the moment when the Patriarchy actually had to flee from Constantinople to Russia. From that moment on, Russia really became the, from the standpoint of the Vatican, the epicenter of the heresy and the heretics. So that's what it ultimately comes from. Next question. Tsigankov mentioned in his book Russophobia is the fear of Putin's political system. Based on the statement, is it correct to define it as Russophobia, or is it better to define it as anti-Putinism or Putinophobia? It has nothing to do with it. I just mentioned how this Russophobia could have ancient origins, and to the surprise of many Russians, the hatred that they experienced throughout the entire Cold War didn't stop when they gave up on communism. So this whole, especially since the dawn of the media, this has been going on, and it only essentially changed when Yeltsin purely and totally submitted on bended knee and worshipped Washington, along with a little bit before him Gorbachev. But so anyways, no, it's not directly connected to Putin. It's connected to Russia more or less existing. Yeah. So again, because I put this in the terms of racism, that would be like saying linking the hatred of African Americans to one particular African American. Like, that's not how that works. Gary Saul Morrison says in this article that Russia is to blame for what he, Russophobia, mainly due to its habit of surrounding its history with myths and legends. In the mind of a Russian patriot, Westerners are historically ungrateful and backstabbers. No, that is not true. Ungrateful because Russians saved Europe from the Mongolian horde by fighting the Mongolians in their own land. Backstabbers for invading Russian territory in the moment of weakness, referring to absolutely not. For the last 300 years, Russians have viewed the West with the rosiest of rose-tinted glasses, and even people as recently as those who grew up in the 90s were absolutely sure that everything in the West was the roads were paved with gold. Since the moment of Peter the Great, essentially telling the Russian masses that their culture is inferior, they have looked upon the West as being superior. In fact, they mention the attack of the Swedes on the Russians and all that. Now, I'm not quite sure because the actual historical context of this gets a little bit debated, but after one of the major battles, Peter I wanted to drink with the Swedish officers, and there's a debate as to whether he did that to try to make friends with them. In the Russian tradition, started especially by Ivan IV, that you accept your enemy into the fold, that you, rather than slaying your enemy, you bring them, sort of assimilate them, much like the Borg or something. But there's also a sort of school of thought that when Peter I did that, had that dinner party, it's because he really saw the Swedish officers as being more Western and thus more superior to himself and his own officer corps. So yeah, so this is whatever this David or Gary Saul Morrison said is complete rubbish. That is a very Western view of Russia, and it's not even like a side stream view in Russia. This is the first I've ever heard of such a thing. That's ridiculous. It's completely made up. Gary says that Russia should refocus its glorification of war into its own literature. Most likely, the author mentions that Russian literature is the greatest of the Russian contributions to the world. Russians would also agree with that. I'm not so sure, but they are obsessed with this idea that everyone loves their literature. I quote, "Not Nevsky, but Chekhov. Not tanks, but Turgenev. Pushkin's Russia over Putin's Russia." Okay? Based on the same statement, would you say that the current Russian administration is neglecting the non-military parts of their history when making their case to the rest of the world? First off, the Russians don't make their case to the rest of the world. Maybe the first time they've even kind of tried to do that was recently during the Tucker Carlson interview. Russia's done an absolutely dismal job outside of RT with trying to express really any sort of vision of itself from within its own country. And even then, RT is very official. You know, it's a news channel, and it's not exactly an ideological channel. If you notice, it's mostly news, not that much programming. So I think even RT really doesn't see its mission as some sort of ideological message sender, more of a battle for the truth against the lies of the mainstream media. I think that might be more the way they see things. And do you think it's a valid strategy? There is no strategy. Russia actually pretty much lacks any sort of strategy in terms of how it is. They just don't do that. They really don't do anything to really work towards controlling public perspective outside of Russia itself. Very little. And that was seen within the war in Ukraine, because one of the reasons why was the Maidan able to happen? Because the West was able to convince the Ukraine that the West has roads paved with gold and is the utopia, and that we needed to shrug off the evil repressive force that is Russia to enter the European Union utopia. And that same thinking has been successful in pretty much all the former Soviet socialist republics. Just in Ukraine, it was very successful. So yeah, Russia doesn't project some sort of uniquely militaristic view of its history to the outside. It doesn't really project any view of its history. So there you go. Another interesting statement I saw in the author's article is Russia's vision of geography. For Russia, geography is spiritual, not physical. Where Russians have fought, it should be rightfully and have a claim to it. Do you agree with such a statement? Now that's finally something where, yeah, Russians generally see their society, I believe as the philosopher Alexander Dugin said, it's like a heart. It goes, it pumps in and pumps out. It can expand and it can contract. So essentially where the border isn't sacred. It's something flexible. However, Russians definitely do not see their destiny outside of the Eurasian landmass. They don't see a destiny in creating some sort of network of African colonies or taking over Brazil or doing something of the like. That essentially Russia is a land empire and must remain a land empire. And every potential new region that enters it has to enter voluntarily in order to maintain the land empire. So this is finally the first thing you've had here written that I kind of agree with. So, okay. Next, already on to page 2. Given the current geopolitical situation and the Western attitude towards Russia, can the latter maintain the realist approach in international relations? I don't see why not. Why can't you maintain... Because there's really, at least from what I see, there's two schools of thought in international relations. There's the realist school and the sort of liberalism school. And Russia can't use the either. So if there's some sort of third option, I don't know... give up. So essentially, if you're not going to be liberal, which Russia has chosen to do, and if you look at its foreign policy in terms of like the BRICS and how it's reacted to a lot of the moves of the West, it's deep in the realist school of international relations, and that's what's going to stay. Unfortunately, if you would have provided maybe there's some new schools of thought in international relations that I don't know about, but if it's A or B, it's definitely B. So there you go. Since the beginning of the Putin regime, Russia's attempted to reset diplomatic status, especially towards the West. Nonetheless, these attempts did not achieve the expected outcome. Having said this, Russia opted for a multi-vector approach in diplomatic relations. and to a certain extent, the multi-vector approach still stands. However, since the deterioration of relations with the West continue to grow, can we expect a more Eurasianist Russia in the near future? Do you have any predictions? Geographically, Russia is in Eurasia, but politically, is Russia safer to be Eurasian? Well, the West didn't really give Russia much of a choice in this. You have to remember that Putin isn't an ideological person, and he's at the helm. He doesn't really think of things in those terms. He's very pragmatic. And I think he's sort of rolled with where the punches led him. So, yeah, I mean, Eurasianism is definitely something that exists. It is something that is studied in Russia. But is it some sort of like official state ideology? No. But essentially, the West rejected Russia, and Russia has to go forward. So, yeah, I would say that a soft Eurasianism is what's going to be for the foreseeable future, because of finally, after 300 years, let's just say the siren's call towards the West has been shattered. How would Russian IR as an international relations theory differ from the Anglo-Saxon theories? Well, the Anglo-Saxon theory is the liberal theory, and the Russian theory isn't Russian, it is the realist theory. For example, you mentioned in your work that English countries study international relations with the idea of running affairs in the best way in a position of strength. Historically, the USSR also dealt with friendly partners in a position of strength. I'm not quite sure what you're referring to in my work. I wish you could have quoted me there, because a lot of people misquote me very often. But, yeah, Russia tends to think of things in the sort of realist position, that they see that there's a lot of other actors on the planet, hence this whole multipolar world thing is very much, I would say, in the realist school of thinking. It is not utopian, and it is certainly not liberal. When at least one of the poles, being Iran, is a sort of theocracy, and the Chinese system is a kind of communism. Yeah, so yeah, they're definitely in the realist school there. So yeah, but yeah, but I don't know. Again, you didn't really define position of strength. I mean, we can see over the last 30 years that obviously the United States has definitely tried to use direct, blunt strength in many wars and little conflicts all over the globe. You can see Russia's done much, much less of that, and also always in response. The war in Georgia was a response, despite what the mainstream media tells you. What happened in Ukraine was definitely a reactionary move from the way Russians see things. So Russia is very reactionary in pretty much everything, to be honest. Even with like visa policy, like how tourist visas are made. The United States set their policy for Russians, and then the Russians kind of mirrored it, you know? So yeah, if Russia remains reactionary, then it kind of depends on the behavior of others towards them. Well, there you go. In your article, you mentioned the strong influence of the liberal Russophobes. Could you provide a basic overview of their origins and why their hostility towards Russia? As far as I know, former President Obama has attempted to engage with Russia in the most practical manner, though he was unable to do so due to the presence of the liberal Russophobes. Why? Well, how could... The liberal Russophobes love everything in the West, including Obama. It's amazing. He's half white or something. Wow, that's so liberal. So, yeah, I think when I'm, again, because his questions are kind of short, if you're talking about the liberal Russophobes, that would generally, when I first think of that, I would think of that as sort of like the Moscow bourgeoisie that have, and St. Petersburg, that have mostly fled due to the war. It's all the pseudo-celebrities that Russia lost because of the war, who've had to flee to other countries, where they've woken up and realized that no one wants them there, and now they're all broke. Okay? So this sort of liberal intelligentsia type of person, when I first came to Russia, like 2006, going to 2010, this was a very strong force. It was strong enough to get, thousands of people to march, I guess, against Putin with their little white ribbons in like 2010. Now the liberals, essentially the liberal Russophobes, have been utterly crushed. All of their media networks have been crushed. Expressing their opinions is basically, at the very least, a social faux pas, where it could definitely be a career ender. They've ultimately been defeated. So that article may have been from a long time ago, and yes, they did have a lot of power. You could watch in the past, a talk show where you'd have a debate between two people. One was a liberal, and then one was a Russian patriot. And the thing is, the Russian liberals made up, at least then, based on their voting, 2% of the population. But they were always in equal footing with the rest of the 98% of the population. Why? Because they had a lot of the money, especially coming in from Washington, and a lot of the influence, and a lot of radio stations, and a lot of sweet positions in the media. Don't think they're gone. A lot of them are still there, but now they're scared, and so they shut up. So yeah, it's a different thing. The power of like the Russophobic liberal Russian could really be felt from, say, like the perestroika period, when actually, to be honest, it was sort of liberal Russophobia that destroyed the Soviet Union. Going into the sort of the 90s, and then Putin has maybe unconsciously really crushed these people. Again, I say unconsciously because he's never really taken any action against them. It's just that his policies that are more nationalistic and pro-Russian and all that other stuff just sort of naturally have defeated these people, and their own disgusting, hateful, vile behavior has made them hated, which is kind of what's happening in the West to the whole alphabet letter people who are, it's really, when they start marching through the kids with satanic t-shirts saying, "We're coming for your kids," that's kind of the point where, the eyes are opened. And with a lot of the Russian liberals who, during periods where Russia was under attack, or especially during the process of thousands of Russians being murdered over those 8 years from the Maidan to the beginning of the war, being murdered by the anti-terrorist operation of first Poroshenko, then Zelensky, they took great joy in it. And their joy in the blood of Russians being murdered just for being Russians really revealed their true nature, and it sort of deplatformed them automatically. And I hope they all rot in hell. Next question. In the event of a Trump re-election, can we expect more pragmatism in relations with Russia? Could Trump achieve what Obama initially attempted? Obama didn't attempt shit. I don't know where you get this from. Obama, who was supposedly, from what I'm told, is one of the most charismatic leaders of our time, as in he was a slightly 2 shades darker version of Kennedy. Again, from what I've been told, I don't agree with that, but that's what the majority view is. So if he had so much sway, so much charisma, he could have done a lot. Obama didn't do very much. Obama did not do very much. I'm sorry to break your fantasy there, but that's the thing of it. So Obama didn't try really to do anything because essentially after Hillary Clinton at the time was the Secretary of State, she gave Lavrov the big red reset button where the word reset was written incorrectly in Russian. It was written overload, and that was very telling for the future. It was all fake. It was all PR. And from that point on, that's when they really got down to organizing the whole Maidan coup and creating the nightmare of Russophobia that's in Ukraine. So Obama didn't do anything. Trump sort of delayed the inevitable. In some ways, Trump gave the Russians even more time to prepare. So Trump was sort of like a big, let's just put it this way. His presidency wasn't exactly the most efficient, but it was definitely the least bloody of modern presidencies. So good for him. I'll put it this way. The more we have people like Trump in power, the more likely we are that one day we can have sane, realistic relations between the United States and Russia. So Trump is definitely a step in the right direction, but he's not like some sort of end-all, be-all solution because there's a lot of... the United States isn't a dictatorship. There's a lot of people involved in this whole thing, and a lot of them can do a lot of things against the will of Mr. Trump in the shadows. Next question. Based on the reading of your book, Russophobia, again, that's not my book, the phenomenon of such phobia is mainly promoted by the American elites to pressure Russia into making economic and political concessions. Historically, the old Russophobia of the 19th century somewhat connected to the contemporary version. Well, you could say that there kind of was an attempt for Russians to, by making Russians feel inferior to the West, it'll make them agree to accepted international norms that are terrible, right? So Russians, because they like to be liked, because they're from a more collectivist society, they really, or I should say, They really deeply desire and want to be liked. That is part of their culture. They want to be respected and they want to be liked by other people. And of course, coming from an individualistic culture where we don't care what other people think, that gives us a massive advantage where we can constantly kind of make them feel embarrassed or inferior, and they're going to kind of like your good old-fashioned house Negro, grovel on their knees to try to be accepted into the club. Thanks to the actions over the last 10 years, finally, after hundreds of years, Russians don't see any desire to be part of the club, especially if the club is filled with homosexuals, freaks, murderers, and Nazis. So there you go. That changed a lot. But definitely, Europe, I think more subconsciously, and again, I think a lot of this whole Russophobia thing is a much more subconscious effort rather than conscious. Definitely works because it comes from an individualistic society, sort of telling a collectivist society that they're bad. It really plays on those collectivist instincts to want to be liked and to want to get along and to want to play ball and all of this other stuff. So, yeah. There, like I said, there's definitely this tendency within Russian society to want to be, to accept anything that's sort of generally accepted by the rest of the world. We should accept that unquestioningly. There's the word, right? There's a lot of that, and that is one thing that is very scary, because a lot of things that are sort of global are not good for Russia. In one of your articles, you mentioned that Western leaders should think strategically when engaging with Russia. Can you provide more specific details? Again, I don't think so, but again, with Western leaders, the problem is that their entire attitude towards reality, their rejection of the concept that we're already in a multipolar world. If they just accept that fact, we could move forward. But they're still stuck in their globalist, wokeist, great reset, whatever you want to call it. They're still stuck in sort of that vision of the future. And even the ones who aren't in sort of that, let's just say, liberal crowd are still then stuck in the kind of like Cold Warrior crowd where they still see everything in terms of the United States as the great power and the only power, and because we're the better people, we have the right to do this, and our system is the only just and fair system, blah, 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 so we can, dictate to anyone any sort of terms because we're the holders of the true torch of democracy, and you're all anti-democratic goy, So, essentially, it's not that they don't think strategically when engaging with Russia. It's just that strategy isn't part of it. They're more ideological, and if they are thinking in terms of strategy, their perception of Russia is wrong, as we've seen during the entire Ukraine war. Their perception of Russia is wrong. Their perception of themselves is wrong. Their ideology is wrong. So, it's kind of like they say, bad data in, bad data out. Well, that's everything with them. So, yeah, maybe they think they're thinking strategically, but again, bad data in, bad strategy out. There you go. So, yeah. Source 11, what do you mean about that? In the field of media and its consumption, I came across an academic article that highlighted the persuasion of Russia's strategic narratives as part of the cognitive warfare that Russia is waging against its Western counterparts. Would you say that Russia is doing nothing more than replicating what the Western media is doing? After all, when we turn on the news, regardless of the outlet, we can say that Russia has never really been portrayed in a positive light. So, again, in what way is Russia waging a form of cognitive warfare? How many people in the West have watched Russian mainstream movies? I could say that with the release of Atomic Heart and maybe the Stalker series, of course the Stalker game series came from Ukraine, but the people who made it primarily speak Russian. That was super popular. There's a little bit of Russian influence within the video game world, but again, try to prove that it's all part of some sort of psyop or something. If so, it's a very limited psyop. Or what is World of Tanks? I think that comes from Russia, doesn't it? Is there anything in it that you think is really twisting the way that people view Russia and politics? I would say that for the most part, Russia isn't waging a war. That this is much like in the way that the United States has gotten accustomed to blowing up people in Iraq who are helpless, shooting goat herders with from helicopters in Afghanistan who at best have an RPG-7 to shoot back at them. This is exactly the same thing. So the Russians are basically like the, Afghanistani goat herder types. Their ability to fight back is limited. In fact, Putin during the Tucker Carlson speech said that it's quite an expensive luxury to try to wage a propaganda war against the United States because the United States has so much. So Putin says basically it would be very draining, so why fight it? I totally disagree with that position. I think it is necessary to wage a soft power war because soft power tends to ultimately wind up being much cheaper than hard power. But in general, Russia does not really, in any sort of grand, cohesive way, project much into the outside world because the outside world, especially the Western world, is completely and totally controlled by the Western elites and establishment and all that. The information space is really controlled. There might be some successes in terms of like the alternative media where people are willing to hear out Russia's positions and the other side of things. Again, the Tucker Carlson interview is a good example of the alternative media. But ultimately, every Russian, I often bring up the movie Star Wars because I think it is really the most, it's ultra popular. Everyone's seen it, but it also really has this sort of like American attitude towards foreign policy of we're the white hat good guys, so we can shoot the black hat bad guys and do whatever we want, and it's cool because we're the good guys. No justification needed. Like the attitude of sort of the rebels within this whole thing, who actually caused a lot of death and destruction across the empire, really mirrors that arrogant type of foreign policy that the United States has. And that has been seen by pretty much every young boy growing up and a lot of young girls. Has Russia even come close to achieving the opposite effect? No. Well, maybe there's Masha and Medved, the little children's cartoon, but again, I don't really think that really portrays anything of a geopolitical nature. Many Western media analysts said that Russia's narratives picture itself as a besieged fortress. To simplify, Russia's self-victimizing itself and to make its international behavior legitimate, making exclusive use of relative discourse. Well, if you look at the mother of all sanctions and the attempts by the West, where you have like people like Lloyd Austin say that their ultimate mission with promoting democracy in Ukraine is to weaken and shatter and break Russia. That Biden said that the ruble would be turned into rubble. We've had pretty much all the Western politicians, especially at the beginning of the war, come out and say that their motives are really to break Russia. So you have to forgive Russia for being paranoid when the entire Western world has united against it and created all these sanctions packages and has waged the little proxy war in Georgia and the big fat proxy war in Ukraine against it. So, Russia is actually, I think, being besieged economically and militarily, literally. So there you go. I noticed from reading Russia's recent foreign policy concept and from Russia's media outlets that the term Russophobia is consistently used. Many of the narratives are directed at outlining the international misconduct of the West rather than focusing on Russia. Gary D. Ronsley made a specific statement about RT. The latter could focus more on creating a positive image of Russia instead of accusing the West all the time. I think I know. Well, the thing is that RT generally deals with a lot of Western issues because it's in English and for foreign people. Maybe he's right, but if RT did focus on really just showing what's happening in Russia, this person would probably say the opposite. He'd say, look, it's just a propaganda piece. All they show is all the good stuff that happens in Russia, and they hide all the bad stuff. Propaganda. So there's really no way to make anyone in the West happy, so you shouldn't even try. I mean, about these sort of like intellectuals and liberals and all that, you'll never make them happy. And in fact, that's why I think it would be really good if RT took a hard pro-MAGA right-wing turn. I think that they would be able to gain even more audiences and really support that kind of movement, because he can't make the liberals happy. They're going to hate Russia no matter what, especially now after they banned the whole LGBT thing. But anyway, so with this Rawnsley, I think he's wrong because he wouldn't be happy no matter what they did. So yeah, but again, it would be nice if Russia did have a cohesive sort of program in terms of how it's going to express itself to the West, who it's going to give, to whom it's going to give grant money, and to sort of get this soft power machine going here in much of the way that the West does, because Russia complains a lot about the soft power machine of the West, but it doesn't do that much to actually create its own. So there you go. What do you make of the term Putin apologist? As you might already know, many media personalities in the West, including scholars, self-loathing, have been called such terms. Well, you can be considered an apologist for any ideology that you disagree with. I could say that you're a Biden apologist if you support the wokest sort of beliefs that are against the Russian mainstream. Just calling someone an apologist means that you're implying that the other side is obviously liars. They can't be telling the truth because I disagree with them. So this person is just creating some sort of series of apologetics to try to lie to us all. So yeah, that's like useful idiot is also a relative term. Because I have pro-Russian views, that makes me a useful idiot to Hillary Clinton, right? Whereas if we look at, I don't know, the legend herself, remember Jen Psaki when she was like that, the White House press secretary? She was considered the useful idiot number one from the American standpoint to a Russian sort of way of viewing the world, right? So both the being an apologist or being a useful idiot are just relative terms, and to insult people who believe in the opposite political ideology, and they're ultimately meaningless. Sergei Lavrov in 2007 mentioned that the West still needs to overcome the Cold War. Would you say that entry into the Euro-Atlantic bloc of many of the Eastern European countries can be considered the main factor in the hostile attitudes towards Russia? Okay, well, yeah, the West is or at least the United States still really sees the world in terms of the early days of the post-Cold War world. Zero-sum game, us versus them. We're the good guys, everyone else is the bad guys. A very Cold War thinking. I would agree with that. And that, if we don't take control of Iraq and Afghanistan, that means the other side will. Again, zero-sum game. But the countries of Eastern Europe, where it's easier to find people who are Russophobic entering these blocks, has that changed anything? No, because that hatred has been forged by the West. If you remember Bandera's insurgency up until he was killed in the middle of the 50s, that was all sponsored by the West. So all of this stuff, the Tiki Torch parades, the right sector, the Svoboda movements, the neo-fascists in the Baltics, they all get the blessings and financial support and other type forms of support from the West. It isn't that bringing those people into NATO changed the nature of NATO. It's that NATO wanted to bring these people in because the purpose of NATO is to keep Germany down, keep the U.S. into Europe, and, keep the Russians out of Europe, or maybe even to really destroy Russia. So there you go. Yeah. Pew Research. The closer the country is to the Russian border, the more the country wishes to be part of NATO, and the harder the feeling towards Russia. Well, that's obvious. The hatred between Koreans, the Chinese, and the Japanese are much stronger than, say, the attitudes of Koreans towards Brazilians, because they're close to each other, and they share a lot of beef and a lot of history. This was discussed about the whole Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth during Putin's interview with Tucker Carlson. You know what I mean? There's a lot of hatred because Russia really stamped out Poland as being a major power. Of course, the Prussians and the Austro-Hungarians also played a role in that, but thanks to U.S. propaganda, no one in Poland remembers that. Poland was partitioned, but all the Poles can remember is that it was partitioned by the Russians. The other two people who got their chunk, we don't talk about that. So, again, this has to do with being close in proximity, means that there's more opportunity for sort of harder feelings. And yeah, So there you go. And also you have to remember that essentially European politics are fake politics. They're all vassals. These countries' opinions don't matter. So you could say the leadership of Moldova wants to join NATO. They're just puppets. Moldova's not really a real actor on the geopolitical stage. Okay. Anyways, Leah Dustlieva said in her article that Russian culture is colonial and imperialist. Russia never had any colonies. It didn't. So Russia doesn't have colonies and did not have colonies. Done. And imperialist. Land empire imperialist, yes. Its nature remains a marginal line of thought. What do they mean by that? Many readers and scholars fail to detect this colonial nature due to their lack of understanding of it, possibly meaning that many are not aware of what happened previously. Russians have been actively trying to eliminate Ukrainian culture. She recalls several events, such as the 1937 Sandarmokh Karelia massacre and the Holodomor. Moreover, Russian academia intentionally does not mention these atrocities in their history books. People are aware of them, only the Holodomor affected pretty much everyone in what would be the sort of more central, as it's called, despite the fact that on the globe it's to the west, but like the central part of the Soviet Union, it affected way more people than just the Ukrainians. The Holodomor was a convenient, unfortunate historical reality of the goofiness of the early first half of the Soviet Union and collectivization, and that was used to be turned into some sort of, it was turned from a unhappy accident that killed millions of people into being something that was pre-organized. So again, within Russia, there is no Holodomor. There was just horrible, disgusting mismanagement and a lack of respect for human life by the early Bolsheviks. Furthermore, if people in the West really cared about the Holodomor, they could have cut the sanctions that were affecting the USSR at the time. I'm just saying. Would you agree with the statement? If you agree with Lisa's statement, no. Leah is, again, she is just repeating this weird Western version of history. So again, let's take this. Okay. So if the assignment of the Russians was to destroy Ukrainian culture, why did that only happen coinciding with those couple years in the 1930s where there was like really bad crops globally? Remember the whole Dust Bowl phenomenon in like the Depression era America? So why did it only happen then? Why didn't they continue to sort of kill the Ukrainians off after that? Like after this event in the sort of mid 1930s? Why didn't they then use the excuse of the chaos of World War II, much like Hitler did, to build a bunch of concentration camps and slaughter them or something, right? They didn't do that. And then there was nothing after that. And then after Stalin died, well, there was really nothing after that. And there's been nothing after that, ever since now. In fact, just like I've pointed out to people out of other people, there's a Ukrainian set of like restaurants with the Ukrainian flag and the national costumes and all that other stuff. And it's never closed since the beginning of the war. So again, this is the sort of projecting perspective of some Western, academic or whatever, journalist, who has read the history of these regions completely from the perspective of the West, which is completely false, because Russian history has always been interpreted through the lens of a sort of subconscious or conscious, but I would say mostly subconscious, fear, hatred, tribalism, hatred of the outgroup, through that sort of lens. So there you go. So this is ridiculous. And you call these facts. For Russians, the Holodomor is the fact. It's a fact that people died. It is not a fact that anything was done in a conscious way to spite the Ukrainians. And like I said, why did they only then do it once? With Karelia, especially, during the early part of the Soviet Union. Karelia, very, very underpopulated region. There's a lot of forests and a lot of cold, and there's a lot of places to hide a lot of bodies. Why didn't they just take everyone out? There you go. All right, so I came across authors with similar views when approaching Russian culture. They mentioned that Russian culture enjoys privileges compared to its neighbors, like Ukraine and the Baltic states. Moreover, it invites scholars to apply post-colonial studies when analyzing Russian culture. Do you agree with this? Can post-colonialism provide unbiased knowledge? Post-colonialism as in what? Unfortunately, there's no definition for that here. So you could say that a lot of the politics that, say, France and England are dealing with is because of a large influx of migrants, I guess, from their former colonies or whatever. I don't know. I don't know what you mean by post-colonialism. What is that? It's definitely dealing with the problem of the breakup of the Soviet Union. But then again, all the people within the Soviet Union all had the same citizenship and the same rights before the law. So you can't really call it a particular colony. So yeah, Russia suffered a lot and continues to suffer from the breakup of the Soviet Union. But I think that is completely different than what the Spanish, French, English, Germans, Dutch, Belgians, whoever the hell else did in Africa over hundreds and hundreds of years. These things are not even completely comparable. You know, I don't remember the British saying like, oh, well, now we've beaten the Zulus down. Great. We're going to consider South Africa to be an even partner. It is going to be a semi-autonomous oblast. Well, actually, they would say, no, we're going to take the major ethnic groups of South Africa, we're going to divide them into these semi-autonomous oblasts, and they're all going to have British citizenship, and they're all going to get votes in Parliament, and it's going to be great. We've defeated the Zulus, so now they're going to be with us, and we're going to be equals, yay! That didn't happen, but that's how Russia related to all the territory that it expanded and took, or was invited to take, which happened many times over history, because Russia tended to be actually the nicer, gentler, good alternative to people who are more, let's just say, bloodthirsty and fanatical. So there you go. Especially the letter for like the Altai region to join Russia, like the actual letter that was sent to the Tsar at the time. They still have a copy of it where the local authorities are like, please come put us into your country. We want to be safe. We want our culture to survive. Okay. And guess what? Their culture did survive. Isn't that interesting? So, yeah, to compare Russia's expansion to colonialism is stupid. It's very, very stupid and very, very, it is sort of wishful thinking. They wish that they could demonize Russia and put it in the same camp as some of these other sea empires and yeah. But then again, remember, if we're talking about people who are academics, academics are always in this constant battle to classify this, to write some sort of doctorate degree or get some sort of grant. And as long as there's people paying the big grant money to get garbage, like saying Russia is a post-colonial collapsed empire with a history of genocide, hey, as long as someone is paying grant money at Yale, they're going to write, research papers on this. So this is all part of the sort of research paper industrial complex. So this is disgusting. It is stupid, and it is not anywhere close to truth. So I do believe I've answered all of your questions within the span of here 45 minutes. So I hope you enjoyed this. And if you're watching at home, because I'm going to turn this into a podcast, I hope you enjoyed it as well.